I was a news anchor in the 1970s. Back then I was a young bachelor. I had the obligatory adult film star mustache required of every man in my profession. I also had a closet full of polyester suits that would make a character played by actor Will Ferrell proud. I drove a Plymouth Barracuda. While I do not like to brag, the cherry on top of it all was how I did have a way with the ladies. My small amount of local celebrity status helped. I lived in an apartment complex. Emily was the landlady I paid rent to every week. She flirted with me on occasion. Though flattered, I did not want to risk moving over a broken heart I would have left her with if we chose to get involved. "You're always giving the small businesses exposure," she said one day after I dropped my check off at her office. "I watch you all the time. You do such good work by encouraging a competitive economy. Keep it up." "Well, I appreciate you helping our ratings." Despite my immaturity and lack of self-control, I was not a stupid person. I could conclude it would not have been a good idea to take it any further with her and me, so I kept things professional. The shift at work which changed everything started as any other. My coworker Dale Sutherland had plans to handle the Be a Good Sport segment on air. He would recap how Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs in the latest bit of baseball coverage. I had worked with Dale for over a year at that point. He struck me as a goofball and hard drinker when he was not clocked in, and a dedicated worker when he was. He seemed unusual that day. I stood in the production control room and watched Dale on one of the many glowing screens. He made his way towards the desk on set. He was haggard and had a slouched posture and a heaving chest. His face held a dour expression. His clothes had many wrinkles. I was to go on after him. He carried a baby carriage behind him into camera view. No child was in the seat. He had a kid's book cradled under his arm. He sat down and his eyes seemed to wander past both the camera and the teleprompter. Was he about to do an improvisational act on live television? I pondered. It made no sense. No, that would be too much of a risk to his job. He opened the book and pieces of cardboard stood stiff. It was a pop-up. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a vial. "The world is nothing more than a monsoon of garbage on a flat and dying plain," he said. "This place is a wide landscape that leads to a deep pit of anguish. Goodbye." He uncapped the small glass tube and tilted his head back. I ran down the hallway and onto the set as screaming erupted from the crew around us. I tackled him. Air escaped his lungs when we hit the ground. It was the first time I had stopped a human body with my own since high school. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. I gave him a stream of profanities. I saw him look up at me with the same expression I would picture on a man who had escaped drowning, or one missed by a speeding bus. He seemed bewildered and in disbelief, but happy rather than angry with me. The authorities arrived and took him to a mental institution. I later found out that the cameras were not even rolling. If Dale intended to take his own life by poisoning on a syndicated show, he was unsuccessful. The investigators found that the vial did contain an admixture of arsenic and opium. I wanted to know why he had brought along the dark-colored baby carriage, let alone the book. I had many questions I needed answered by him. I wanted to know why he did not tell me he was so pessimistic about a future he should have seen as bright. We had made it to the small leagues of media with our broadcasting degrees after all. What more could we ask for? The hospital room was dark when I walked in. Seeing him connected to an IV and nasal needle was surreal. I knew him to be one of the healthiest people I had ever met until that point. "Did you ingest any of it?" I asked as I pulled up a seat next to his bed. "No," he said, "but an Anchorman built like Franco Columbu gave me a concussion after he slammed me to the floor. Sorry about that. I wasn't going to let you hurt or kill yourself, though. My wooziness is getting better." "Good. You know, you can always tell me when something's bothering you. I hope you will from now on." I let the sentence hang in the air. I had never opened up to him like that. "How are you feeling otherwise?" I asked. "So much better, like I have more clarity. Something got a hold of me in the last few days, mentally. I couldn't focus on anything except." Dale trailed off. He looked around the room for eavesdroppers. "The illusions," he continued, "of a man with skin turned inside out. He came into my life ever since I read that book. He pointed to the corner of the room. The same children's book and the baby carriage sat there, almost as though they were facing me. I started reading it to my son because he found it at his school library. His librarian told him it was a banned book. I ordered him to bring it home anyways. I wanted to teach him the value of thinking for himself, to not let anyone else dictate what thoughts he can and can't have. As soon as I flipped through the pages, I felt something, a gloominess. It didn't let me go until I woke up here. Do you think they'll let me keep my job? I ignored his question as I stood and walked over to the book. I looked at the cover, which was a black backdrop of a greenish sun as it rose on the horizon. The title was The Entropy of Ms. Fuseli and Other Narcolepsies. I opened it in the middle. The pop-up was the blossoming of blood and unraveling of red. The other illustrations were of terrified, gruesome faces and people weeping. I turned to the next passage. A stage popped out, and a woman cut out, stood there in a gray dress with silver paint on her body. Her mouth opened up and her finger was in midair like she had delivered a lecture. I don't know, I said. If they will let you keep your employment, I mean, if you're willing to make strides toward getting the help you need, if you issue an apology, if you thank God the cameras malfunctioned for whatever lucky reason, you can't let your negative emotions build up, though. Promise me you won't. By the way, where did the carriage come from? Why are you dragging it around? You don't have any young ones unless there's a secret family none of us know about. I wish you hadn't read any of it, he said. It took me a while for his words to sink in. I still had the book in my hands, and I had the yearning to let it drop. He jumped out of the bed and yanked the IV out of his arm. It's coming back, he said as he made his way towards the window. He is chasing me. Staff, I said as loud as I could. Dale started to bang his fists against the window. He picked up the chair and tried to shatter the glass frame. A nurse walked in, saw the event, and backed out. She went to a phone at one of her stations and called for security. 2 guards came in and held him down before he could leap to his death 4 levels down. I stood behind the tape deck operator in the production control room. Although worries about my friend did not lessen, it was good to get back to some sense of normalcy by going to work. I had already consumed a glass of scotch. I stuffed my mouth with a handful of mints after to mask the incriminating fragrance. It was a rule I made a personal oath to never break, and I had done so. Yet it seemed impossible to cope otherwise on that particular day. I rested the children's book I had taken from Dale's ward and rested it against a wall near a pile of cables. The technical director's chair was near its location, and he stared at all the screens. He did not notice the morbid illustrated text. I stood, watched, and waited for my time in the spotlight. As I did, I saw one of the monitors become black and white. I found this odd, so I peered at it even closer and watched as it turned back on. One of the other anchors came into view, but the view of him maintained its monochromatic visual. I turned to the director to see if he would react. He remained motionless. I looked back up at the screen and watched as my peer transformed before me. He now looked terrifying in an inhuman way I never reasoned I would have to witness. He had no flesh. Someone used either fire or a bed of nails, welded with surgical accuracy to grate him. A smile rested on his face, a neutral physiognomy that was neither a grimace nor a grin. He shuffled his papers and stained the edges of the files with blood smears. I reeled back and cowered. Are you seeing this? The director looked back at me with annoyance at my words, as dismissive as he was spiteful. What are you crowing about? I have a job to do. You don't see him? I asked. You have to. He ignored me and went back to his task of surveying and making sure everything was operational. I stared back at the figure as color blanketed the video display. The individual was now a crimson, wiry and humanoid shape. His eyes locked onto mine through the terminal. The barrier behind him appeared to melt and became out of focus. He stood. He towered over everything, as though he could have been at least 7 feet tall. I peeked my head out of the door and gazed down the vestibule to get a better glimpse at him. He walked towards me at a plodding pace, methodical and sluggish. His gait had a coordinated but careful movement. His skull made an impact with an exit sign. He left it scribbling with vital fluid. He continued to take steps toward me, unfazed. I screamed. The director stood and called for help as he had me sit down. Are you on drugs? No, I said. I swear I'm not. You should take an early out today. I averted my eyes down the corridor and the monstrosity vanished. Sweat had stained my undershirt and I was shaking during the walk out of the building. I went home that night and fell asleep. The vision I was a witness to made me tremble with horror. When I drifted off into slumber, I had a vivid dream. In it, I stood in a park next to the ocean. A wave of baby carriages crashed onto the shore and drowned me. The phone in my kitchen rang and woke me up. I stood and walked over to the receiver. I pressed it to my ear with great reluctance and a complete lack of orientation. "You have to destroy the book," Dale's voice said as he choked back tears. "I swear it has an evil spirit." I know how crazy that sounds, but I can't think of any other explanation. I haven't seen the man that was chasing me since you stole the book. It's on you now to completely shred it or throw it into a ditch and drive far away. Alright. You are not going to, are you? I can already tell. That's the way it was when I owned it. I did not want to let it go. It's as though it would not let me. You have to fight the urge to preserve it and rid yourself of it. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my friend. I went to the public library and showed the bibliognos there the work. An old lady behind the counter with horn-rimmed glasses and a bright sundress told me she was unaware of such a title. She had never heard of the author either. "The story doesn't make any sense," I said as I flipped through it. "Could you decipher it?" "It's about a woman who is trying to teach a class or something. You're a grown man and you need help reading a book written for preteens." Yes, I should have felt ridiculous or insulted or both. I knew as soon as she started reading it her opinion must, by nature of the obtuse narrative, change. She ripped it out of my hands and consumed the whole thing in a matter of seconds. It's a chronicle of a witch who wants to marry a prince, but his family won't allow it. So she curses everyone in his bloodline by hexing their appointed historian, their writer as it were. The result is the spell backfires and the prince himself dies. The witch, consumed with guilt, throws herself into a river. Before she does, she gives a speech to all the villagers about the danger of necromancy. After she drowns herself, the entire castle the royal family used to live in is bad luck, uninhabitable. Their children pass away in the following years. The ledger of the family history becomes a terrible omen to anyone who owns or tries to read it. This tale is not one I would share with my kids. I thanked her and walked over to an empty section full of encyclopedias. I cross-referenced the publisher of the book. It was a small press. They went by the name Carriage. I poured through even more sources and searched for citations. Every single title by Carriage was out of print. I searched for who the founder was and saw it was a woman with the last name of Fuseli. I found an interview with her discussing the book business in a long out-of-print magazine. Someone buried it in the back of the archives. Her first name was Emily. The photo which depicted the publisher left my jaw on the floor. It was the younger face of the woman who collected my rent every month. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.